I'm Oscar McCook, and I'm happy to open up Duckling's Alchemical Theater today, the 4th of December, 2025. It introduces the commencement of the work and is an invitation to ascend Jacob's Ladder. This is part one of three parts that will be subsequently uploaded in time. Duckling's Alchemical Theater is a name that came to me, and it's involved in a much larger project that would also be unfolding in the future. There's nothing new, nothing is mine. I'm only, in a way, speaking about forgotten truths. This is not for beginners, but then again, it's for anyone interested. This particular presentation provides hints and clues as to how the tools were used to unfold what for me has been the most incredible adventure of life, self-consciousness. Who am I? Well, I've been 40 years a student of the Tarot, and pursuing the Tarot has led me to a vast array of things that will be partly reflected in today's presentation. I'm still a student. I spent 40 years as a technician in the biological sciences in both the university and the private sector. And that's about all we need for the moment. Jacob's Ladder. What is it? Well, when I first saw this, that Warren Kenton, as Zev Benjamin Halevi, brought to the world, I was really literally in awe. I didn't know what to make of it. At the same time, I experienced an excitement that I can't explain. This is too complicated to try to break down, and Warren has written many books doing that. So we'll skip that for a moment. But I will emphasize that the colors that we see, the white represents the world of Absolute, the blue, Beria, the purple, Jetsira, and the red, Asiya, the world of divine emanation, the world of creation, the world of formation, and the world of our body, the place of action. These colors are found in Exodus 26. Here, to give a slight representation of how this intercalated ladder works, what we see on the left is four separate ladders representing the four worlds. And what, if we're aware of our system, what we see is that the second world always binds to the Tifrith of the first world through Kether. And we see that as we go along the way. What's interesting is that that overlap also means that Da'ath, the place of knowledge represented in the left of the black dot, overlaps with Yesod, the place of foundation. Now, when we look to the right, we see what I just described, that the one ladder connects to the other through Tiferet, Kether to Tiferet, and as we go on, we see our extended ladder. What was Jacob's dream? Well, Jacob dreamt of a ladder set up on the earth. I'm reading the bottom line for them in the moment. The earth being a Sia. He saw angels going up and down this ladder, representing the worlds of Jitsira and creation. And on the top of the ladder, the place of Asiluth, he saw God looking down upon him. Over the years, and it's been 20 years since I first encountered this Jacob's Ladder, and I must admit, I've given numerous talks on Jacob's Ladder, but it hadn't really fully resonated for me. I hadn't really fully understood that it's a map of the anatomy and physiology of our psycho-spiritual constitution. Now, of course, pay attention to here on this ladder. The psyche represents the world of formation, and the spirit, the world of creation. And this map is highly complicated, as we can see here, but I will say that it enables us to turn the outside in and vice versa to bring the inside out. Now, it wasn't easy, and I spent over 20 years dancing with this, but it is a very valuable map. I think if I had known that it was a map earlier, I would have made much faster progress. In any event, that is one of the most important things I want us to get from this, that this is a map, and it's a map of our anatomy and physiology of the psycho-spiritual constitution, which are normally invisible and unknown to us due to that are set up along the way. One of the most important things that Warren brought out for me is this cav. A cav in Hebrew means a chord or a line. Well, we see the line formed here is from the I am on top up there by Kether, the crown, to the I am down at the bottom, Malkut, the place of the kingdom. What we have is Kether, the crown, Dot, knowledge, Chokmah, wisdom, Bina, understanding, Hesed, mercy, Gevurah. Gevurah has a couple of different definitions depending on where we are, but we'll say now justice. Tifereth, beauty, Netzach, mercy, Hod, the intellect, Yesod, our foundation, and Malkut, the kingdom. What was most impressive for me is that this calf, this link, this cord, helped me recognize that I am always connected, regardless of where I am on this journey, along this path, that there is always something connecting me. But one of the most significant things that, as we see, that the left and the right pillars are blank. The sephiras, the little circles, are left blank at the left and right pillar as we focus on what has become a fifth tree, a tree in the mist. In the Bible, in 2 Genesis, from Genesis 2:9, it says Batach, which is translated in the King James Version as in the mist, but it literally means inside, within, in. So Jacob's ladder reveals to us a fifth tree that is one central column. Israel Bel Shem Tov, who I see as a saint, as far as I know, only had one piece of writing, and it's in the epistle of the ascent of the soul. I refer to the best as Izzy, for that's what he is to me, Izzy. In this epistle, Izzy tells us that he saw souls ascending and descending from one world to the other through the pillar known to adepts in esoteric matters. I smile when I read that. But what's most significantly, he tells us he reached the place of the Messiah, which here on our tree, on the far right, is right at the center of the tree of creation, the Tifereth of creation, which is also the place of the Shekinah. I have it marked in red on the left side of it so it is clear to us. And while talking to the Messiah, he asked him, "When will you come?" And the Messiah answered, "Redemption depends on the dissemination of the teachings which he taught him, and which will enable all the people to perform unifications and ascents of the soul." So, what's interesting to us in this regard is that not only did Jacob dream that he saw souls ascending and descending, in that case it was angels, but there's no difference. But Izzy also had a similar experience and reported a similar effect. But more than that, he said the redemption will come when his teachings are disseminated so that all the people may perform the unifications and ascents of the soul. Jacob's ladder was dreamed or seen through inner vision, according to Masonic initiation by Wilmshurst. And he tells us that perceptible today by any of us whose inner eyes have been opened. So this is a second account with the possibility of performing unifications and ascents of the soul so that redemption may come. For our present day evolutionary unfoldment, there are three principal worlds or planes that I like to focus on: the world of nature, of our body, the world of the psyche, and the world of spirit. Most of this presentation will be on the world of the soul, the psyche, which is associated with desire and emotion. On the far right, we see that world extracted from the tree of life so that we can focus on it. And what's interesting here, this is also another tree from Warren, is that here we see the planetary spheres located on the different Sephirotic arrangements. Nature is very complicated. And I'll start off with this quote from Galatians 4:3 from St. Paul. "Even so, we, when we were children, were in bondage under the elements of the world." This will play a larger role a little bit later on, but it's something to keep in mind. The whole section of Galatians 4 I would read for those interested. What we want to focus on now is these four sephiras down at the bottom, of which I've only labeled Yasod. These four elements in Asiya represent a very early evolutionary stage where the involving spirit was leaving the animal kingdom to become human. In other words, we were not in physical manifestation yet. With this slide, I want to emphasize the words from Corbin and his creative imagination, which is a wonderful book and I recommend highly. The other world already exists in this world. It exists in every moment in relation to every being. I'm hoping that this is slowly becoming an awareness for us. It took me many, many years to recognize, even though I had heard of four worlds and I had even given presentations on the four worlds and Jacob's ladder, to fully incorporate or unfold the concept of four worlds was not an easy thing for me. I struggled with it for a long time. Partly it will become obvious in the near future, but for the moment, let's just say that what's going on here at this upper part of the world of Asiya, the world of making, from Tiferet to Kether, is that we're slowly becoming aware of our subconscious processes. They're slowly becoming into awareness. One of those will be as simple as the breathing. We become aware even as children, and we need to hold our breath when we dive underwater. That we can hold our breath, that there's a certain length of time we can hold our breath, that we can regulate our breath so that it becomes rhythmic and rhythmic in and out breath, inhalation, exhalation. We can also do that with our hearts, although that may be a little bit more challenging. But that's why I'm saying that it's a slow process of becoming conscious of certain bodily functions here in this case, but also of an expansion of awareness. Now, what's interesting here, this slide is very busy, so let's go to the central tree that I've tried to simplify a little bit. And one of the things that we see is that we're working at multiple levels. By the colors, the lower part from Malkuth to Tiferet, which are rich reddish purple, is the part where Asiya is still from underneath or from above, influencing the world that we call the psyche, the world of the soul. And as we see when we look to the Sephiras between Tiferet and Yesod, where I've labeled in red the world of Asiya and in purple the world of Jitsira, we're seeing that these interactions, though we're not aware of them, have an impact on one another. The more conscious we become, the more we become able to regulate our nature. The four personality structures between Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malkuth, these four lower spheres in the world of the psyche, are actually the four higher spheres in the world of Asiya, right? So Malkuth in the world of the psyche is Tiferet in the world of Asiya. Yesod, which is the foundation in the world of the psyche, is the place of Da'ath, of knowledge, in the world of Asiya. Hod, which is our intellect, represents the mother, Binah. Netzach, desire, is associated in the world of Asiya with Chokmah, wisdom, the father. What is important to recognize is this overlapping of worlds generate a veil that keeps our in keeps our inner, more vital self, an aspect of our soul, hidden from us. It has the of preventing us from being aware of the inner dimensions, what makes us tick and keeps us focused on the outer world. Now, to get a little bit more complicated, even though the idea here was to simplify this Jacob's ladder that Warren brought to the world. Here we had just the world of the psyche before us. And what's interesting is this lower place of Malkuth, we see here that there's a circle with a cross in it representing the earth, but at the same time, it represents the body and it represents our elemental level. And what's intriguing is that Malkuth in Jasira represents the four elements at the level of the body that we need to become aware of and we need to regulate and control. On the left hand side of the tree, we see the card of the Wheel of Fortune, represents Kaf. At the four corners of this card, we see the four elements in symbolic representation, the same four elements that Ezekiel saw in his vision. What's interesting here is that they're represented hidden by clouds, little clouds underneath the head of the bull, the lion, the eagle, and the angel, which is man. I find this card beautiful. On the right hand side, we see the same four elements in the card of the world, the card that represents Saturn. So we have Jupiter on the left, Saturn on the right. On the tree, they're actually in opposite directions. But in any event, what we see, the four elements in the transformational tarot, which we're looking at here, they're crowned. On the right, they no longer have clouds blocking our vision. It's a slightly different representation. As any further would be beyond where we're aiming for today. What's interesting is that on the right here of the central tree, in red, I suggest that there is another four elements. And these four elements are not the place of Malkuth divided into four, but these four elements are represented by Malkuth, Yesod, Hod, and Netzach, the four spheres represented by Saturn, the Moon, Mercury, and Venus. They represent a more subtle expression of the four elements that are directly associated with what I call the personalities. Here, the central tree is just to give us an idea of where we're working on. And what's important for us to recognize is this personality structure needs work. We need to familiarize ourselves with the four structures. Malkuth, the kingdom, which in and of itself has four elements that we need to become aware of. With Yesod, the foundation. On the right, you can see I've overlaid those four Sephiras with the tarot cards that are representative of them. For me, the tarot cards were very significant in depicting symbolically the energies that we're dancing with. Hod, splendor, represented by the Magus. Key 1, the magician. Netzach, the seventh Sephira, represented by the Empress and Venus. What is important is the recognition that these must be worked at one at a time. And not only do we have to encounter the Sephiras one at a time, but the paths that lead from one Sephira to the other also represent another level of energy. For the moment, let's focus on Jasad, the place of the ego. In the true and invisible Rosicrucian order, this is represented as a grade. And the grades have these kind of funky names like Theoricus and Zelator, which have their reasons. I don't want to get into all that. I'm just wanting to give an example of some of the ways that we can work with this if we choose. Now, the grade of Theoricus has to do with the occult theory of the operation of the forces of subconsciousness. This is literally quoted from Case's True and Invisible Rosicrucian order. What's important is that each grade, whether it's the grade of Zelator and Malkuth or the grade of Theoricus in the place of the ego or Jasad, each grade represents an initiation. And an initiation represents an expansion of consciousness. What's important for us at this stage with regard to this presentation is that Yesod, the place where the high priestess sits, who, ironically enough, is virginal, represents the generative organs of the primordial man. Yitzhira is overlapped at this particular region with Asiya, so that Yesod and Yisira not only represents our ego, which is centralized here, but it represents the place of knowledge on the tree of Asiya that lies under it or above it, depending on your perspective. Here, I want to switch gears for a little bit because we've been dancing with the overlapping spheres, but we don't really necessarily know what that implies or how to deal with that. And what's intriguing to me, and I don't have any answers, I just want to point out certain things, is in Genesis 1, God, in this particular case, God was the Elohim, part of that divine triad up on top, the supernal triad, created the heaven and the earth. And then we experience a reversal as we get to Genesis 2 4. And it says, in the day that the Lord God, and now it's interestingly enough, we have a different aspect of God. There's only one God, but these are different aspects, different, how would I call it, attributes of the one God. So the Lord God, this will be the English translation, which is actually Yod He Vah He Elohim, made, representing the world of formation, the earth and the heavens. And what I wanted to emphasize here is that in creation, heaven and earth were created. First the heavens and then the earth. During formation, it seems that we first create or we form the earth and then later the heavens. Now, what's interesting is that Yod Vahe Elohim is at the place of Tifereth from the divine, Tifereth in the world of emanations, whereas the Elohim that created the heaven and the earth happens to be a part of the divine triad, the supernal triad up ahead. Sorry about that. What's interesting to me is this formation that no longer seems to have created Adam male and female, but it doesn't say that it did not. It just doesn't say it at all. But he says he created it out of the ground, ha adama. This is significant for us for our second presentation. We won't go into any further in this one, but it's important that we recognize this ha adama. And again, I'm at a loss as to what exactly the image is that one can create Adam from in the world of creation, which, by the way, was never separated, was maintained as male and female. What's interesting, and I want us to note before I move on, is that in creation, image, Baselem, of Elohim, the creation of Adam was in the image of Elohim. Formation was from the dust of the ground. And I think we can leave it at that for the moment. Interestingly enough, in Genesis 2:7, the word Vayitzer, which I said pertains to the world of formation, is spelled with a double yod, spelled with two yods. The two yods in Vayitzer indicates that God has made man with a dual nature, two impulses, the impulse towards the good and the impulse towards evil. In this slide, I feature the Pythagorean Y, and it shows us the left hand and the right hand path, the path of sulfur, the path of mercury. And I'll repeat, God has made man with a dual nature, two impulses stemming from one root. Underneath that, I have the quote from Matthew 7:14, because straight is the gate, and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. But as I reflect on this slide, on the left and the right hand, and reflect on my life, I wonder if it's not possible, or should I say, if I have not taken both paths simultaneously. Here on this slide, I want to take us back to the world of formation when Eve was tempted by the snake. For God knows, this is the snake speaking now, that in the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Now, this is interesting to think that this is the second time now we've heard about eyes opening so that we can see the angels of God going up and down Jacob's ladder. And now eyes opening will allow us to see and know good and evil. Continuing with Genesis 3, when the woman saw that the tree was a desirable thing to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, then they ate of the fruit. Then the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. Interestingly, in Genesis 2:25, just a little bit before the passage just read, they describe Adam and Eve as naked and not ashamed. There was no doth, there was no knowledge. Then the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. What's interesting is that the word for naked, arum, is the same, both geometrically, they have the same numbering values, but something has happened when we look to the words that I have here for arum, Genesis 2:25, and arum in Genesis 3:6-7. Why does knowledge of good and evil reveal nakedness, and specifically nakedness of our generative organs? What's interesting in the spelling of the arum in 2:25 is that the yod was in the middle of the mem, which is how we spell mem, the seas. But it's transposed in Genesis 3:6. The yod has moved from between the two mems to between the ayin and the resh. Why the transposition of the yod? We have no answers at the moment. This is just an introduction. Getting back to where we left off with Yesod and the card of the moon, we read that Yesod, the ninth Sephirah, represents the powers of Chokmah, the father, wisdom, and Binah, the mother, understanding, combined. When we look to our diagram, we see that in Asiya, in red, we have Binah and Chokmah, and underneath them, of course, Da'ath. But that same Da'ath represents a Yesod in the world of formation. In the Book of Concealed Mystery, we read, Father and Mother are perpetually conjoined in Yesod, the foundation, but concealed under the mystery of Da'at, knowledge. Now, that's fascinating because when we continue to look at our tree, we see that Yesod and Da'at are one at the level of formation. We have Yesod, the generative organs of the primordial man. And at the same place, on the tree of Asiya, it's Da'at, knowledge. And as we've now learned, in Asiya, we've already been affected by the separation that happened in Yetzirah earlier. So the knowledge that we have now is knowledge of good and evil. Our conscious awareness of unity is concealed under the mystery of Thoth, knowledge. In other words, we see, apparently, separation, the play of opposites, where in reality it's only masking a unity that is veiled. This separation is fueled by desire, which is the path that unites Netzach and Hod at the place of formation. And at the same time, in Asiya, it represents the union of Bina and Hakma. The tower that represents desire is Pe in Hebrew, and it's 80 by its numerical value, which is equivalent to the letters of Yesod added together, which add to 80. So again, we're seeing that our desire, fueled by the sense of separation, is equivalent to the Sephira in the world of formation that represents our foundation. But in the world of Asiya, the world of making, it represents knowledge. Our soul is tinged with natural desire and emotion. Desire, also associated with the Empress, Venus, and Netzach, is the path that unites desire and the intellect, that unites Netzach and Hod. But again, at the level of Asiya, is wisdom and understanding. So this path, the 27th path of Pe, represents a knot that must be dissolved, and at the same time, it represents our egocentric personality, here on that tree represented by the card of the moon. That personality complex is represented here on the far right is very arduous, and it's very arduous work, and it's long in coming. I use the tarot cards because they help me visually to envision the work that's ahead and the work that must be done. The tower, the 27th path, is a reciprocating path. I show it here in both of the trees. Now I've removed those other cards so that it's a little clearer, the work that must be done. The reciprocating path unites desire and intellect, Venus and Mercury. But to emphasize a little bit more the significance of the card of the tower, the card that represents the mouth as the organ of speech, and it represents Mars. What is interesting is when we look at the astrological representations of these cards, we see that Mars, the tower, is exalted in the place of the devil, which represents Capricorn. At the same time, Mars is the ruler of key 13 death, which astrologically represents Scorpio. When we look to the far right, in the tree there, what we see is that the path of Capricorn is represented by the devil, and it's a 26th path, uniting the intellect represented by the magician, Mercury, and the path of the sun, Tifereth. Scorpio, the place of Mars's rulership, represented by the key 13 death, unites the path of Venus and the sun. So these are paths that we need to cross before we can get to the place of Tifereth and gain knowledge of the self. But we can't do that until we dissolve the first psychic knot, which again is equal to Jasad by numeration, and it represents Peth. The mouth is the organ of speech. So what are these psychic knots? There are three psychic knots. They're basically energetic knots that block the flow of the life force. Desire incites the imagination at the level of the psyche. Key 13, representing corresponding to Noon, represents the imaginative intelligence. On the far right, I show a little picture here representing where the three psychic knots are located in the body. Here on the tree of life formed by the circles to create the constructive circles for the tree of life, we see the knots, we see where Mars is, the card of the tower, we see the card of strength, and we see the Venus high above. We also see their place relative to the skeleton. On the far right, I show them on Jacob's ladder, and we see that they pretty much fall in the psyche, the soul. But interesting to note that Venus up above is also part of the world of creation. The card of strength falls in between, and Mars, of course, falls in the place of creation, the place of formation, and the world of action. The three psychic knots are also represented in our Christian tradition by the three temptations of Jesus. They're also represented in our Eastern tradition by the three granthis in yoga and in Tibetan Buddhism. In yoga, they represent Brahma, Vishnu, and Rudra, and their locations as far as chakras are concerned is the Muladhara, Anahata, and Anya chakras. The three knots of magic are also represented in Egypt's bondage of Israel. What's interesting is when we look to the far right, another tree from Warren, we see that it's at the level of Yasad, Asiya, that he writes the children of Israel in bondage. That's fascinating because if we recall from our earlier points in this discussion, this is a place prior to our physical incarnation. Unfortunately, it's beyond the scope of today's introduction, but it will be brought out, and it's a very exciting and fascinating aspect of our conscious development. What I wanted to point out here is with the card of the devil, which also represents Capricorn zodiacally, and although we won't be able to get into it today, it represents the four elements out of balance. But the devil is represented as Nakash, our serpent, and fascinatingly, the word Nakash geometrically is 358, the equivalent to the word Mashiach. So the serpent and the Messiah in Hebrew have symmetry through numerical association. 358 equals Nakash equals Mashiach. Gives us reason for pause. More interesting, the devil, which is the snake, is equivalent to Taith, the Hebrew letter Taith, which is the first letter of the word Tob, which means good, suggesting subtly that the snake is also good. I want to read to us a small quote from the Book of Tokens by Paul Foster Case regarding the card of strength and the letter Taith. This is the serpent of temptation, yet from it cometh forth redemption. For the serpent is the first appearance of the Anointed One, and that which casted Adam out from the garden of the east, even that shall bring him back once more to paradise. So our three psychic knots are generated by desire, by noga. Noga is the Hebrew word for Venus. And I want to leave us with a positive account. So we'll take a look at Moses' rod, which on God's command turned into a serpent that ate up the snakes made of magic by the Egyptian sorcerers. Snakes that were created in the psychic realm can be overcome by God's command with divine and creative worlds. It's interesting when we think about what actually occurred when Moses laid his rod on the ground and it became a snake. The Bible reports that Moses ran away in fear, but Moses came back, and upon God's command, he picked the snake up by the tail, and it became a rod again. It's a little, how would I call it? A little reminiscent of our chemical solve and coagula. He lays the rod down, it becomes a snake. He picks it up by the tail, it becomes a rod. But the main message here is that the passional soul, the nephesh, influenced by the divine spirit, is turned into a wonder working power. The passional soul, influenced by the divine spirit, is turned into a wonder working power. This is the end of part one. But I'll leave us with the words of Jocelyn Goodwin, who tells us that, like a serpent or Mercury, alchemy slithers from spiritual to the astral, from the etheric to the physical, and back again. Here I'd like to thank Warren Kenton for his Jacob's Ladder, Shirley and Peggy Gotthold for bringing us a transformational tarot, Paul Case for his true and invisible Rosicrucian order and grounding of Boda. Your Kabbalah has been a reception, and alchemy is also interwound in the four worlds. Part two of the Ugly Duckling's Alchemical Theater will be providing information of the descent of spirit into nature and the ascent of consciousness, introducing Mother Nature, the Black Madonna, and the Hungry Heart. I hope you all are with me and have enjoyed this, and that it may help your future unfolding. Thank you.